The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its crystalline walls displaying the real-time positions of 47,000 inhabited worlds. Ambassador HFY of the Viridian Collective watched the holographic displays with growing unease as red warning indicators bloomed across sector after sector. The humans had done it again. Impossible, whispered Council Speaker Mordun, his 12 eyes fixed on the tactical readout. The Krillian defense grid was impenetrable. 700 years of military engineering, quantum encrypted barriers, and enough firepower to sterilize a moon. How did a single human vessel breach their perimeter? HFY's tentacles curled with anxiety as she accessed the battle recordings. The human ship, designated Indomitable Spirit, had approached the Krillian home system 3 standard days ago. Not with the massive fleet formations that other species required, not with the careful diplomatic protocols that civilized races observed, but alone. A single vessel against an empire that had conquered 60 star systems. The recording showed what happened next with crystal clarity. The human ship had transmitted a simple message: surrender now, or face the consequences of your actions against the colony worlds. The Krillians, predictably, had responded with overwhelming force. 12 dreadnoughts, each the size of a small city, had moved to intercept. What followed defied every principle of galactic warfare that the Council had established over millennia. The human vessel had not retreated. It had not attempted to negotiate. Instead, it had accelerated directly into the heart of the Krillian formation, weapons blazing with an intensity that made the local star seem dim by comparison. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Play sequence 7 again, HFY commanded, her voice barely steady. The hologram replayed the moment when the Krillian flagship's main cannon had struck the human ship directly. The energy discharge should have vaporized any known vessel, but the human ship had absorbed the blow and continued its assault. More troubling still was the transmission that followed from the human captain. Is that all you've got? My grandmother hits harder than that. The casual dismissal of weapons that could crack planets had sent ripples of terror through the Krillian command structure. Within hours, their entire defense grid had collapsed. Not because the humans possessed superior technology, though their weapons were undeniably effective, but because something in the human psyche broke the will of their enemies. This makes the 7th major power to fall to human expansion in as many cycles, reported Tactical Coordinator Velthera, her usually composed demeanor cracking. The Syndicate of Worlds, the Crystalline Empire, the Machine Collective, the Hive Queens of Andromeda, the Stellar Dominion, the Neo-Byzantine Federation, and, now the Krillian Empire. Each time, the pattern is identical. HFY nodded grimly. The pattern was indeed becoming clear, and it terrified every civilized species in the galaxy. Humans didn't just conquer their enemies, they did something far worse. They made conquest look effortless. The door to the chamber dilated with a soft chime, admitting the newest member of their growing crisis committee. Director Quelnox of the Pacifist Union glided in on his repulsors, his normally serene expression replaced by barely concealed panic. The humans have responded to our request for an audience, he announced without preamble. They're sending an ambassador. A collective shudder ran through the assembled delegates. In the 300 years since humanity had first achieved faster-than-light travel, their ambassadors had become legendary figures of dread throughout the galaxy. Not because they were warlike or cruel, but because they possessed an utterly alien approach to diplomacy that left even the most sophisticated civilizations reeling. Who are they sending? Asked Speaker Mordun, his voice barely above a whisper. Admiral Sarah Chen. She's the one who convinced the Machine Collective to reprogram themselves into a gardening society. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone present remembered the Machine Collective. They had been the most logical, calculating species in known space, their quantum minds capable of processing millions of scenarios simultaneously. Yet somehow, a single human woman had engaged them in what she called philosophical discourse for exactly 47 minutes and 23 seconds. When the conversation ended, the entire Machine Collective had voluntarily disbanded their military, converted their factory worlds into botanical gardens, and dedicated themselves to cultivating rare flowers. To this day, no one understood how she had done it. When will she arrive? HFY asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Her ship entered our system 6 hours ago. She should be docking within the hour. 6 hours ago. The implications sent another wave of unease through the chamber. Earth was 47 light-years away. Even with the most advanced human faster-than-light drives, the journey should have taken weeks. Yet somehow, Admiral Chen had arrived before they had even finished debating whether to contact humanity at all. How is that possible? Speaker Mordun demanded. Unknown. Our sensors detected no ship until she transmitted her credentials directly to our communication array. When we asked how she had traveled so quickly, she replied that she had been in the neighborhood. The phrase sent chills down every spine in the chamber. Humans had a disturbing tendency to be in the neighborhood whenever significant events unfolded across the galaxy. They claimed it was coincidence, but the mathematical probability of their timing was so remote that most species had concluded they possessed some form of precognitive ability. Director Quelnox continued his briefing with visible reluctance. She also transmitted what she called reading material to help us prepare for our discussion. The files include detailed strategic analyses of every major military engagement in the galaxy over the past 50 years, economic projections for the next 2 centuries, and something she labeled as helpful suggestions for improving galactic civilization. Suggestions? Zexai's tentacles writhed with nervous energy. Among other things, she proposes replacing our current trade agreements with something called competitive cooperation, establishing what she terms constructive conflict resolution protocols, and implementing a galaxy-wide education program focused on what humans call adaptive thinking. Every delegate in the chamber understood the implications. When humans offered suggestions, they weren't really suggestions at all. They were previews of changes that would inevitably occur, whether the galaxy agreed to them or not. The humans had a remarkable ability to make their ideas seem so reasonable, so obviously beneficial, that resistance felt almost foolish. The worst part was that their suggestions usually worked. The 17 species that had implemented human-designed economic models had seen their prosperity increase by an average of 300%. The 12 civilizations that had adopted human conflict resolution methods had eliminated warfare within their territories entirely. Even the Hive Queens of Andromeda, after being convinced to try human-style individual expression within their collective consciousness, had experienced what they described as unprecedented levels of happiness and productivity. Speaker Mordun announced the chamber's AI. Admiral Chen has requested permission to address the council directly rather than meeting with individual delegates. Granted, the speaker replied, though his voice carried the weight of resignation. The main holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of a human woman who appeared to be in her 50s, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge that no single being should possess. She wore a simple blue uniform with minimal decoration, yet her presence filled the chamber with an almost gravitational force. "Greetings, esteemed members of the Galactic Council," Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying clearly across the vast space. "Thank you for agreeing to this conversation. I understand you have concerns about recent developments in human space. Admiral," Speaker Mordun began carefully, "we are indeed troubled by the rapid expansion of human influence throughout the galaxy. Your species has achieved in 3 centuries what most civilizations require millennia to accomplish." Admiral Chen smiled, and somehow that simple expression managed to be both reassuring and terrifying. "I appreciate your directness, Speaker Mordun. You're absolutely right to be concerned. Human expansion has been remarkably rapid, and I understand how that might appear threatening to established powers." "Appear threatening?" Zexai interjected, her diplomatic training finally overriding her fear. "Admiral, your species has systematically dismantled every major military power it has encountered. The galactic balance that has maintained peace for over 1,000 years is collapsing." "Ambassador Zexai," the admiral replied, and the fact that she knew Zexai's name despite never having met her sent another chill through the chamber. "I think you may be misunderstanding our intentions. Humanity hasn't been dismantling the galactic balance. We've been improving it." The statement hung in the air like a gravitational anomaly, bending logic around itself in ways that made rational thought difficult. Director Quelnox found his voice first. "Improving it? You've conquered 7 major civilizations in as many years." Admiral Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Conquered is a strong word, Director. Let me ask you this, Are the Crystalline Empire's citizens happier now than they were under their previous government? The question caught everyone off guard. The Crystalline Empire had indeed undergone remarkable changes since human intervention. Their rigid caste system had been replaced with what humans called merit-based opportunity structures. Their citizens reported unprecedented levels of satisfaction with their lives. Their scientific advancement had accelerated by orders of magnitude. But that wasn't the point, was it? That's not the issue, Speaker Mordun said firmly. The issue is that humanity is changing the fundamental nature of galactic civilization without consultation, without consensus, and without regard for established order. Established order, Admiral Chan repeated slowly. Speaker, may I share an observation? In the 1,000 years of galactic peace you mentioned, how many species achieved significant technological advancement? That's not. How many solved major social problems? How many explored beyond the borders of known space? How many asked themselves whether the way things were was the way things should be? The question struck at the heart of every delegate's discomfort. The galactic status quo had indeed been remarkably static. Most species had reached a technological plateau centuries ago and had seemed content to maintain it. Social problems were managed rather than solved. Exploration had slowed to a near halt. Stability is valuable, Zexai argued, though her voice lacked conviction. Stability can become stagnation, Admiral Chan replied gently. Humanity doesn't want to conquer the galaxy, Ambassador. We want to inspire it. Inspire it to what? Director Quelnox demanded. To grow. To dream. To reach for possibilities that haven't been imagined yet. The Admiral gestured, and the chamber's display shifted to show star charts marked with human exploration routes. The scope was staggering. Human vessels had pushed further into unknown space in 3 centuries than the combined efforts of all other species in the previous millennium. Humanity is young, Admiral Chen continued. We haven't learned to accept limitations yet. When we encounter a problem that can't be solved, our first instinct isn't to manage it or work around it. Our first instinct is to solve it anyway. Even if that means destroying established civilizations? Speaker Mordun asked. Especially then, The Admiral's smile returned, and this time it carried an edge that reminded everyone in the chamber exactly why humanity had become the galaxy's dominant force. Because we've learned something that older civilizations seem to have forgotten. Which is, sometimes, the only way to save something is to change everything about it. The transmission cut out, leaving the council chamber in absolute silence. Outside the crystalline walls, the stars continued their ancient dance, but somehow they seemed different now. Less distant. Less fixed in their patterns. Zexai was the first to speak, her voice barely audible. She's still coming, isn't she? For the face-to-face meeting? Yes, Director Quelnox confirmed, checking his instruments. Her ship will dock in 37 minutes. And, then? Then, we find out what humanity really wants from us. But, even as she said it, Zexai suspected she already knew the answer. Humanity didn't want anything from the galaxy. They wanted something for it. Something that would change everything, whether the galaxy was ready or not. The countdown timer on the main display began its relentless advance toward 0, marking the minutes until the most important diplomatic meeting in galactic history. A meeting that would determine whether the existing order would bend to accommodate humanity's vision of the future, or whether it would break entirely. In the growing silence, one thought echoed through every mind present: they were about to discover what it truly meant to negotiate with a species that had never learned the meaning of the word impossible. Admiral Chen's ship, Prometheus Unbound, settled into the docking bay with mechanical precision, but the delegates watching through the observation ports could see that it was unlike any vessel in their experience. Where other ships emphasized either brutal functionality or aesthetic beauty, the human craft seemed to embody something else entirely: potential. Every line of its hull suggested motion even at rest, and its sensor arrays swept the surrounding space with an almost organic curiosity. How many crew members does a ship that size typically carry? Asked Speaker Mordun. Based on our databases, anywhere from 500 to 2,000, depending on configuration, replied the station's AI. And how many life signs are you detecting aboard the Admiral's ship? 1. The implications sent another ripple of unease through the watching delegates. A single human had crossed half the galaxy in a ship designed for hundreds, arriving precisely when needed with information that should have taken months to compile. It was becoming increasingly clear that humanity operated by rules that the rest of the galaxy didn't understand. The docking tube sealed with a soft hiss, and Admiral Chen emerged into the station's receiving area. She moved with a confidence that seemed utterly out of place given the circumstances, nodding politely to the honor guard as if this were a routine diplomatic visit rather than a crisis meeting that could determine the future of galactic civilization. "Thank you for the warm welcome," she said to the assembled delegates. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought gifts." She gestured, and a small floating platform emerged from the docking tube behind her, carrying what appeared to be a collection of simple objects, books, data crystals, and several items that defied immediate identification. "Gifts?" Zexai asked suspiciously. "Information, mostly. Technological specifications for some devices that might interest you, cultural exchanges from various human worlds, and a few things that I thought might help with our discussions." Admiral Chen picked up one of the data crystals and held it out to Director Quelnox. "This contains detailed plans for what we call a conflict resolution matrix. It's a system we developed for mediating disputes between groups with fundamentally incompatible worldviews. I thought the Pacifist Union might find it useful." Director Quelnox accepted the crystal with obvious reluctance, but Zexai could see the curiosity in his eyes. The Pacifist Union had struggled for generations with the problem of maintaining peace between species whose very existence seemed to be in conflict with one another. "And this," the Admiral continued, offering another crystal to Speaker Mordun, "contains specifications for something we call adaptive governance protocols. They're designed to help large, diverse populations make collective decisions without sacrificing either efficiency or individual autonomy." "You seem to have anticipated our specific needs quite precisely," Speaker Mordun observed, though he accepted the crystal. "Not anticipated," Admiral Chen replied. "Researched. Humanity has a saying, know your audience. We've been studying galactic civilization for quite some time." "Studying us?" Zexai's tentacles curled with indignation. "For what purpose?" "To understand how we might help." The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge to every assumption the delegates had made about human intentions. Zexai found herself struggling to process the concept. In her experience, more powerful civilizations studied weaker ones either to exploit them or to defend against them. The idea of studying someone in order to help them was so alien that it took her several moments to even grasp it as a possibility. "Help us with what?" she managed to ask. Admiral Chen gestured toward the chamber's main display, which still showed the star charts marking human expansion. "May I?" At Speaker Mordun's nod, the display shifted to show a different view of the galaxy. This one highlighted not human territories, but patterns of stagnation across hundreds of civilizations. Technological development curves that had flattened centuries ago. Social problems that had been managed rather than solved for millennia. Exploration efforts that had simply stopped, as if entire species had collectively decided that they had learned enough about the universe. "For the past 1,000 years, Admiral Chen said quietly, galactic civilization has been dying." "That's absurd," Director Quelnox protested. "We have achieved unprecedented peace, stability, and prosperity." "You've achieved equilibrium," the Admiral corrected. "There's a difference." She gestured again, and the display zoomed in on specific examples. The Crystalline Empire hadn't developed new technology in 600 years before we arrived. The Machine Collective was running the same optimization protocols they had designed at the beginning of their civilization. The Syndicate of Worlds was using trade agreements that were already obsolete when they were first signed. "Stability is not stagnation," Speaker Mordun insisted. "Isn't it?" Admiral Chen's expression grew sad. "Speaker, when was the last time your people discovered something that genuinely surprised them? When did any civilization in this galaxy last ask a question that didn't have a predetermined answer?" The question struck deeper than Zexai had expected. When was the last time she had encountered something truly new, something that challenged her fundamental understanding of the universe? When had any member of the Galactic Council proposed a solution to a problem that wasn't based on procedures developed centuries ago? You're suggesting that we become complacent, she asked. I'm suggesting that you've become comfortable. And comfort, while pleasant, is the enemy of growth. Admiral Chen moved to the center of the chamber, and, suddenly, the space seemed to reorganize itself around her presence. Humanity is different. We're uncomfortable with comfort. We have a biological and cultural compulsion to keep pushing, to keep questioning, to keep reaching for things that seem impossible. Which is why you've been conquering established civilizations, Speaker Mordun said accusingly. Which is why we've been offering alternatives to civilizations that had stopped imagining alternatives were possible, the Admiral corrected. Every species that has joined the human sphere of influence did so voluntarily, after seeing what we had to offer. And, what exactly do you have to offer? Zexhai demanded. Admiral Chen smiled again, and, this time Zexhai found herself thinking not of threat, but of promise. Possibility. Adventure. The chance to discover what your people might become if they stopped limiting themselves to what they had always been. She gestured toward the gifts she had brought, and Zexhai noticed that several of the unidentified objects were actually artistic creations, sculptures that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, musical instruments that produced harmonies she had never heard before, written works that appeared to be in languages that didn't exist. These are examples of what humans call impossible art, Admiral Chen explained. Creations that couldn't exist according to established principles, but which exist nonetheless because someone decided to ignore the established principles. Director Quelnox had picked up one of the musical instruments and was examining it with obvious fascination. The acoustic properties should be completely unstable. This design violates every principle of harmonic mathematics. Yet it produces music of extraordinary beauty, the Admiral replied. That's the difference between human civilization and galactic civilization. When we encounter a fundamental principle that limits what we want to achieve, we question the principle. That sounds dangerously close to chaos, Speaker Mordun observed. It's dangerously close to freedom, Admiral Chen countered. The freedom to become something more than what you've always been. She moved toward the main display again, and the star charts shifted once more. This time, they showed projections extending thousands of years into the future. In one scenario, galactic civilization continued its current trajectory, maintaining stability until the heat death of the universe. In another, it embraced what the Admiral called directed evolution, pushing constantly toward new possibilities and greater achievements. The choice, Admiral Chen said softly, is yours. Humanity will continue to grow and explore regardless of what the galaxy decides. But we would prefer to do it together with you rather than around you. The implications of the statement were clear. Humanity had already proven they could achieve their goals despite galactic resistance. They were offering cooperation, but they weren't requiring it. What would this directed evolution mean for established governments? Zexhai asked carefully. Change. Constant, intentional change based on new knowledge and new possibilities. Some institutions would need to be modified. Others might become obsolete. But the people within those institutions would have opportunities to become things they never imagined possible. And if we refuse? Admiral Chen's expression grew thoughtful. Then, you continue as you have, and humanity continues as we have, and perhaps in a few thousand years our paths will cross again under different circumstances. The choice was clear, though the implications were staggering. The galaxy could maintain its comfortable stagnation while humanity grew exponentially around it, or it could embrace the terrifying prospect of unlimited growth and change. We'll need time to consider, Speaker Mordun said finally. Of course. How much time do you need? The question caught everyone off guard. In galactic politics, consideration was measured in years or decades. Major policy decisions required extensive consultation with member worlds, detailed impact studies, and carefully negotiated compromises. Several months, at minimum, Director Quelnox stammered. I can give you 3 days, Admiral Chen replied pleasantly. 3 days? That's impossible. We couldn't even convene all the necessary committees in 3 days. Admiral Chen's smile returned, carrying that familiar mixture of amusement and inevitability. Director, everything humanity has accomplished was supposedly impossible. We've found that possibility is largely a matter of perspective. She moved toward the docking tube, pausing only to collect her gifts. I'll be in the system for 3 days. When you're ready to discuss terms, you know how to contact me. Terms? Zexhai called after her. The terms of the galaxy's admission to the human community of worlds, Admiral Chen replied without turning around. It's time for galactic civilization to join the universe. The docking tube sealed behind her, leaving the delegates in a silence that seemed to echo with implications too vast to fully comprehend. Outside the chamber walls, the stars continued their ancient dance, but somehow they no longer seemed distant or fixed. They seemed accessible. The countdown timer on the main display had been reset, showing 72 hours remaining. 72 hours to decide whether galactic civilization would evolve or remain frozen in its comfortable patterns forever. 72 hours to determine whether the galaxy would kneel before human ambition, or rise to meet it. The choice, as Admiral Chen had said, was theirs. But Zexhai suspected that the outcome had already been determined the moment humanity had decided that the impossible was simply another word for hasn't been tried yet. The emergency session convened exactly 18 hours after Admiral Chen's departure, though calling it an emergency session was somewhat misleading. In truth, it had taken that long simply to establish communication with the key civilizations that needed to participate in the decision. The Viridian Collective's quantum communication network, pride of galactic infrastructure for over 5 centuries, had proven woefully inadequate for the speed of consultation that the human ultimatum demanded. Ambassador Zexhai reviewed the responses as they materialized on her personal display, each one more troubling than the last. The Stellar Dominion had attempted to mobilize their battle fleets, only to discover that human vessels were already positioned throughout their territory, not threatening but simply present, like a gentle reminder that resistance was futile. The Neo-Byzantine Federation had tried to establish defensive alliances, but found that most of their potential partners were too busy analyzing the human gifts to commit military resources. Most disturbing of all, several minor civilizations had already announced their intention to request membership in what they were calling the Human Commonwealth. The Botanical Collective of Kepler 442, the Nomadic Traders of the Spiral Arm, and the Academic Republic of New Athens had all submitted formal applications within hours of Admiral Chen's address. The speed of their response is unprecedented, reported Intelligence Coordinator Vaktul, his crystalline form flickering with agitated patterns. Most of these civilizations have never made strategic decisions in less than standard months. Yet they're committing to fundamental changes in their entire governmental structure within days. Director Quell Knox was still examining the conflict resolution matrix Admiral Chen had given him, and his expression had grown increasingly troubled as he delved deeper into its implications. The technology she provided, it's not just advanced, it's conceptually revolutionary. The mathematics alone represent a paradigm shift that could eliminate warfare as we know it. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Asked Council Speaker Mordun, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer was more complicated than it appeared. Not bad, but destabilizing beyond imagination. If these principles were implemented galaxy-wide, every military organization, defense contractor, and conflict resolution specialist would become obsolete overnight. We're talking about unemployment rates of 60% or higher among our security specialists. Zexhai's tentacles curled with nervous energy as she processed the implications. And the adaptive governance protocols? Even more disruptive. They would essentially eliminate the need for traditional representative democracy, autocratic rule, or any of the governmental systems that have maintained order for millennia. Citizens would participate directly in decision-making through quantum-linked consensus networks that somehow maintain both individual autonomy and collective efficiency. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of civilization-ending implications. The humans weren't just offering technological advancement, they were offering to make the entire foundation of galactic society irrelevant. Perhaps, suggested cultural analyst Zendira, her voice carefully neutral, we should examine what has happened to civilizations that have already joined the human sphere of influence. The main display shifted to show detailed reports from the former Krillian Empire, now calling itself the Krillian Cooperative. The changes were staggering. Their military-industrial complex had been converted to peaceful manufacturing within months. Their rigid hierarchical society had been replaced with what their reports called dynamic meritocracy. Most shocking of all, their citizens' happiness indices had increased by factors that previous social scientists would have considered mathematically impossible. "They're not the same species anymore," Zendaira observed quietly. "Oh, they're biologically identical, but culturally, socially, psychologically, they've become something entirely different." "Better or worse?" asked Speaker Mordun. "That's just it. The question itself has become meaningless. They've moved beyond our categories of measurement." The door to the chamber dilated with its customary soft chime, admitting a figure that caused every delegate to freeze in recognition. Supreme Admiral Korthax of the Hegemony Guard stood in the entrance, his battle-scarred exoskeleton marking him as one of the most feared military commanders in galactic history. The fact that he had come personally rather than sending a subordinate suggested that the situation was even more serious than they had realized. "Supreme Admiral," Speaker Mordun said carefully, "we weren't expecting a representative from the Hegemony Guard." "The hegemony no longer exists," Korthax replied bluntly, his voice carrying the weight of military defeat. "As of 4 hours ago, we have officially surrendered to human forces and requested admission to their commonwealth." The statement struck the assembled delegates like a physical blow. The Hegemony Guard represented the single most powerful military force in known space, controlling over 200 star systems and maintaining fleets that could sterilize entire sectors. If they had fallen to humanity, then military resistance was not just futile but inconceivable. "How?" Zexhai managed to ask. "They didn't attack us," Korthax said, and his confusion was evident even through his species' typically stoic demeanor. "They invited us to participate in something they called a strategic simulation exercise." Admiral Chen herself led the engagement. He moved to the center of the chamber, his massive form casting strange shadows in the crystalline light. "We deployed our entire strategic reserve. 3,000 ships, including 12 planet killers and our experimental quantum destabilizers. The humans sent one vessel." "The same ship Admiral Chen arrived in?" Director Quelnox asked. "No. Something called the paradigm shift. When our forces surrounded it, the human commander transmitted a simple message: 'Would you like to see something interesting?'" Korthax paused, and, when he continued, his voice carried a note of something that might have been wonder. "What followed was not a battle. It was a demonstration of possibilities that our military doctrine had never conceived. The human ship didn't attack our fleet. It converted our fleet." "Converted it to what?" "Into something else. Our weapons became tools for terraforming dead worlds. Our planet killers became planet builders. Our quantum destabilizers became quantum stabilizers, capable of healing damaged spacetime itself." The implications sent another wave of shock through the chamber. Military conversion technology was theoretical at best, requiring intimate knowledge of both the target systems and the desired modifications. The fact that humanity could perform such conversions in real time suggested technological capabilities that bordered on the divine. "The most disturbing part," Korthax continued, "was that the process was reversible. When our commanders demanded a demonstration, the human ship converted one of our frigates back to its original configuration, then converted it again into something entirely different. They weren't stealing our technology or destroying it. They were showing us that our conception of what technology could do was fundamentally limited." Zendaira leaned forward, her analytical mind grappling with the implications. "What did your commanders decide?" "They asked to surrender. Not because they feared destruction, but because they realized that everything they thought they knew about military science was obsolete. The human commander accepted their surrender, then offered them something better. Which was membership in the Human Commonwealth Defense Force. Not as conquered subjects, but as equals working toward what they called constructive protection of sentient life throughout the galaxy." The phrase echoed through the chamber with the weight of fundamental change. Constructive protection implied not just defense against threats, but active improvement of conditions for all sentient beings. It was a concept so alien to traditional military thinking that most delegates struggled to even understand what it might mean in practice. "Supreme Admiral," Speaker Mordun asked carefully, "what is your assessment of human military capabilities?" Korthax was silent for a long moment, and, when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had spent his entire life studying warfare. They don't have military capabilities. They have something far more dangerous. Which is? They have imagination. When faced with a military problem, they don't ask how to win the battle. They ask how to make the battle irrelevant. The statement hung in the air like a fundamental shift in the laws of physics. Every military strategist in galactic history had focused on achieving victory through superior force, tactics, or technology. The humans, apparently, focused on making the concept of military conflict itself obsolete. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's AI announced an incoming priority transmission. Admiral Chen requests permission to address the council again. Granted, Speaker Mordun replied, though his voice suggested he was granting permission for his own execution. Admiral Chen's image materialized in the center of the chamber, but this time she was not alone. Standing beside her were representatives from dozens of species, many of which the delegates recognized as former military commanders, government officials, and cultural leaders from throughout the galaxy. "I hope you don't mind," Admiral Chen said pleasantly, "but I thought you might want to hear from some of your colleagues who have already made the transition." One of the figures stepped forward, revealing himself to be former President Yoltar of the Syndicate of Worlds. His presence was shocking not just because he was supposedly in protective custody on his homeworld, but because he looked different. Healthier, somehow. More vital than he had appeared in years. "Honored delegates," Yoltar said, his voice carrying a confidence that none of them remembered from his previous communications. "I wanted to personally assure you that the fears you're experiencing are both natural and unnecessary." President Yoltar, Zexhai interrupted, "You were reported to be under house arrest pending trial for collaboration with human forces." "I was," he replied with a smile. The trial lasted approximately 15 minutes. "I was found guilty of accepting human assistance in solving problems that my government had been unable to address for centuries, and sentenced to continue doing so." Another figure stepped forward, identifying herself as former Empress Velandra of the Crystalline Empire. Like Yoltar, she appeared transformed, radiating an energy and purpose that seemed almost infectious. "The transition process is far less dramatic than you might expect," she said. In fact, most citizens of former imperial territories report that they didn't realize how constrained their lives had become until they experienced the alternatives. "What alternatives?" Director Quelnox demanded. "Freedom to pursue interests beyond their assigned roles. Access to education and experiences previously restricted by social class. The ability to contribute to decisions that affect their lives. Most importantly, the opportunity to participate in something larger than the maintenance of existing systems." Admiral Chen gestured, and the display shifted to show real-time footage from worlds throughout human space. The images were startling in their diversity and vitality. Citizens engaged in projects that ranged from terraforming dead worlds to creating art forms that had never existed before. Scientific research that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Social experiments that redefined the possibilities of civilization itself. "This is what we're offering," Admiral Chen said quietly. "Not conquest, but collaboration. Not dominance, but partnership in creating something that has never existed before." "And what exactly is that?" asked Speaker Mordun. "A galactic civilization worthy of the universe it inhabits." The phrase struck every delegate with the force of a revelation. For the first time, someone was suggesting that the galaxy's current achievements, impressive as they were, represented only a tiny fraction of what might be possible. "How do we know," Zexhai asked carefully, "that humanity won't eventually grow tired of this collaborative approach and simply impose its will by force?" Admiral Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Ambassador, may I ask you a question? In your entire life, have you ever encountered a problem that became less interesting after you solved it?" The question seemed irrelevant, but Zexhai found herself considering it seriously. "No, I suppose solving problems usually reveals new questions." Exactly. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy because ruling is boring. We want to explore it, improve it, and discover what it might become. The moment we stop growing and changing, we become what the galaxy was before we arrived: stable, comfortable, and ultimately stagnant. Former Supreme Coordinator Thello SS of the Machine Collective materialized as a hologram, his quantum form flickering with patterns that suggested deep contentment.
The Admiral speaks truthfully. Humans are incapable of stagnation.
It appears to be a biological and cultural impossibility. They grow restless when things remain the same for too long. Which means, Admiral Chen continued, that our success depends entirely on continuing to find new challenges, new possibilities, and new ways to grow.
A conquered galaxy would be a dead end. A collaborative galaxy would be an infinite source of inspiration. The logic was both reassuring and terrifying. If Admiral Chen was correct, then humanity's expansion would never truly end because ending would be antithetical to their nature.
They would continue pushing forward forever, dragging or leading the galaxy with them toward possibilities that hadn't been imagined yet.
What about species that prefer stability? Asked Director Knox. Not every civilization values constant change.
Then, they help us understand the value of contemplation, reflection, and careful consideration, Admiral Chen replied.
A universe of infinite change would be chaos. A universe of perfect stability would be death.
The optimal path probably lies in dynamic equilibrium, constantly moving forward but never losing sight of wisdom gained along the way. She gestured again, and the display showed projections of galactic development under human guidance. The models were staggering in their scope and ambition.
Dyson spheres around every star in the galaxy. Terraformed worlds numbered in the millions. Technological advancement that made faster-than-light travel seem primitive. Most remarkably, happiness indices for all sentient species that approached theoretical maximums.
This is what becomes possible, Admiral Chen said softly, when an entire galaxy stops accepting limitations and starts imagining alternatives.
The timeline extends over millions of years, observed Intelligence Coordinator Vaktul.
Human planning tends to be somewhat long-term, Admiral Chen acknowledged.
We're not thinking about the next few centuries. We're thinking about the next few geological ages.
The scope of human ambition was becoming clear, and it was more breathtaking than any delegate had imagined. They weren't planning to rule the galaxy for a few thousand years. They were planning to shepherd its development for millions of years, guiding it toward achievements that current science couldn't even conceptualize.
And, if we refuse to participate? Zexai asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer.
Then, you continue as you are, and, in a million years, when the rest of the galaxy has achieved things beyond your current imagination, your descendants might wonder why their ancestors chose limitation over possibility.
The choice was becoming clearer, though no less overwhelming.
Join humanity's grand project and risk losing everything that defined current galactic civilization, or maintain independence and risk irrelevance on a cosmic scale.
We'll need to vote, Speaker Mordun said finally.
Of course.
How long do you need?
At least 48 hours to contact all member worlds and explain the situation.
Admiral Chen smiled that familiar smile.
You have 24 hours remaining of your original deadline. I can extend it to 36 hours, but beyond that, the window for voluntary admission begins to close.
What happens then? Director Knox asked. Then, we proceed with galactic development whether you participate or not. It becomes much more difficult to integrate civilizations that haven't prepared for the transition. The implication was clear.
Join now under favorable terms, or join later under conditions determined entirely by humanity. The choice was still theoretically free, but the practical alternatives were becoming increasingly limited.
36 hours, Speaker Mordun confirmed reluctantly. Excellent. Is there anything else you need to know to make an informed decision? Zexai found herself asking the question that had been troubling her since Admiral Chen's first appearance. Why us? Why does humanity want the galaxy to join you rather than simply expanding around us?
For the first time, Admiral Chen's expression grew genuinely serious. Because, Ambassador, the universe is vast beyond imagining, and filled with wonders and terrors that we can't even conceive of yet. The challenges we'll face as we expand beyond the galaxy will require every form of intelligence, every perspective, and every capability that sentient life has developed. She paused, and, when she continued, her voice carried a weight of knowledge that seemed to press against the boundaries of the chamber.
We're not preparing for galactic development, Ambassador. We're preparing for universal development. And that will require not just human ambition, but the wisdom of every species that has ever learned to think. The transmission cut out, leaving the delegates in a silence that seemed to echo with implications too vast to fully process. The countdown timer showed 35 hours and 57 minutes remaining. 35 hours to decide whether galactic civilization would join humanity's impossible dream or remain behind as the universe moved forward without them. The choice, as Admiral Chen had said, remained theirs. But the window for making it was closing rapidly, and the consequences of delay were becoming more severe with each passing moment. Outside the chamber walls, the stars continued their ancient dance, but now they seemed less like distant lights and more like destinations waiting to be explored. The galaxy was about to change forever, and the only question remaining was whether its current inhabitants would be passengers or pilots in that transformation. The vote would determine not just the future of galactic civilization, but the role it would play in the infinite adventure that humanity had already begun. The vote was scheduled to begin in exactly 6 hours, but Ambassador Zexai had stopped watching the countdown timer. Instead, she stood before the great observation window in her private quarters, staring out at the vast expanse of space that had suddenly become filled with possibilities she had never imagined. The responses from member worlds had been arriving steadily for the past 30 hours, and the pattern that emerged was both predictable and revolutionary. The older, more established civilizations remained divided, their leaders paralyzed by the magnitude of the choice before them. But the younger species, those that had achieved spaceflight within the past few centuries, were responding with overwhelming enthusiasm for what they had begun calling the Great Collaboration. Her personal communication array chimed with an incoming message from her home world. The Viridian High Council had finally reached their decision after 29 hours of continuous debate. She activated the quantum link and found herself facing High Counselor Velthane, whose normally composed features showed signs of exhaustion and deep uncertainty. Ambassador Zexai, the High Counselor began without preamble, the Council has voted. We will support admission to the human commonwealth, with the stipulation that Viridian cultural autonomy be preserved during the transition period. Zexai felt her tentacles curl with a mixture of relief and anxiety. How close was the vote? Closer than we would prefer to admit publicly. The final tally was 643 in favor, 638 opposed, with 19 abstentions. The narrowness of the margin was troubling, but not unexpected. The Viridian Collective had built their entire civilization around careful deliberation and gradual change. The prospect of joining a species that seemed to thrive on constant transformation challenged every principle they had developed over millennia. High Counselor, Zexai said carefully, may I ask what ultimately swayed the decision? Velthane's expression grew thoughtful. A single word in the human cultural files they provided. When our xenolinguists analyzed the term impossible in human languages, they discovered something remarkable. In most galactic languages, the word means cannot be done. In human languages, it means hasn't been done yet. The distinction was subtle but profound. It suggested a fundamental difference in how humans approached limitations compared to every other known species. Where others saw barriers, humans saw temporary obstacles. Where others saw finality, humans saw starting points. That difference in perspective, Velthane continued, made us realize that we might be facing a choice between evolution and extinction. Not physical extinction, but the extinction of relevance. In a universe where impossible is just another word for next project, civilizations that accept limitations may simply fade into irrelevance. The communication ended, leaving Zexai alone with her thoughts. Through the observation window, she could see the running lights of ships from dozens of species, all waiting for the final vote that would determine the galaxy's future. Some were human vessels, but many belonged to species that had already requested admission to the Commonwealth. They moved through space with a confidence and purpose that seemed to infect everything around them. Her contemplation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. The door to her quarters chimed, and she turned to find Admiral Chen standing in the entrance. Not a hologram this time, but the Admiral herself, somehow having gained access to the most secure sections of the Council station without triggering any security protocols. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, Admiral Chen said, stepping into the room with that characteristic confidence that seemed to bend reality around it. I wanted to speak with you personally before the vote. How did you get past station security? Zexai asked, though part of her already suspected the answer.
I asked politely, the Admiral replied with a slight smile. Your security staff were very accommodating once I explained that I wanted to have a private conversation with you about the future of galactic civilization.
The simplicity of the explanation was somehow more unsettling than any elaborate infiltration technique would have been.
It suggested that human influence had already penetrated so deeply into galactic institutions that even supposedly secure facilities offered no real barrier to their presence.
What did you want to discuss? Zexai asked.
Admiral Chen moved to the observation window and stood beside her, gazing out at the assembled ships.
I wanted to thank you, Ambassador. Thank me? For what? For asking the right questions.
For demanding real answers instead of accepting diplomatic pleasantries. For forcing us to explain not just what we want to do, but why we want to do it. Zexai studied the Admiral's profile, trying to understand the purpose of this unexpected conversation.
I was simply doing my job.
You were doing something more important than that.
You were thinking like a human. The statement was so unexpected that Zexai took several seconds to process it. I don't understand.
Ambassador, over the past 36 hours, you've consistently asked questions that challenged assumptions, demanded evidence, and refused to accept answers that didn't satisfy your curiosity.
That's not typical diplomatic behavior. That's human behavior.
Admiral Chen turned to face her directly, and Zexai found herself looking into eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge that no single being should possess.
Do you know why humanity has been so successful in convincing other species to join us? Superior technology? Military strength? Neither. We've been successful because we recognize potential when we see it.
Every species that has joined the Commonwealth was already developing human-like characteristics, curiosity that couldn't be satisfied, dissatisfaction with limitations, the urge to ask what if instead of accepting what is. The implications of the statement were staggering.
Are you suggesting that the galaxy was already evolving toward humanity? I'm suggesting that humanity isn't unique.
We're just early. The characteristics that define us, curiosity, adaptability, the refusal to accept limitations, these aren't exclusively human traits. They're evolutionary advantages that any sufficiently advanced civilization will eventually develop.
Admiral Chen gestured toward the window, where the assembled ships continued their complex dance through space.
Every species out there has individuals who think the way humans think. The difference is that human civilization was built around those individuals, while most galactic civilizations treat them as anomalies to be managed or contained.
And the Commonwealth?
The Commonwealth is what happens when you build a civilization around the assumption that impossible is just a temporary condition. Zexai felt her understanding of the situation shift in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. If Admiral Chen was correct, then humanity wasn't conquering the galaxy so much as awakening it to its own potential. The changes that followed human contact weren't impositions but revelations of possibilities that had always existed but never been explored.
Why are you telling me this? She asked.
Because in approximately 5 hours, you and your colleagues will cast the most important vote in galactic history.
I wanted to make sure you understood what you're really voting on.
Which is whether galactic civilization will embrace its own potential or continue to limit itself to what seems safe and familiar.
Admiral Chen moved toward the door, then paused as if remembering something.
Oh, and, Ambassador? Regardless of how the vote goes, I wanted you to know that humanity will always have a place for individuals who ask the right questions. The door closed behind her, leaving Zexai alone with the implications of their conversation. Through the observation window, she could see that more ships were arriving every hour. Not just human vessels, but ships from species throughout the galaxy, all drawn by the promise of something that had never existed before. The vote began exactly on schedule, conducted through quantum-linked communication arrays that connected every member world simultaneously. Speaker Mordun called the session to order, his voice carrying clearly across thousands of light-years to reach representatives of every major civilization in the galaxy. We are here to decide, he began, whether the Galactic Council will accept humanity's offer of admission to their Commonwealth, thereby fundamentally altering the nature of our civilization for all time. The responses began immediately, cascading through the communication network in a pattern that reflected the galaxy's growing polarization. The younger species voted overwhelmingly in favor, their representatives speaking with enthusiasm about the opportunities for growth and exploration that the Commonwealth represented. The older civilizations were more divided, their votes reflecting centuries of careful deliberation and the weight of responsibility for maintaining stability. As the tally accumulated, it became clear that the outcome would be closer than anyone had predicted. The established powers of the galaxy were genuinely torn between the safety of familiar limitations and the terrifying promise of unlimited possibility. The final vote came from an unexpected source. The Eternal Archive, a civilization so ancient that most species had forgotten they still existed, transmitted their decision in a message that had been composed over the course of 36 hours but delivered in a single, overwhelming burst of information. The Eternal Archive has observed galactic civilization for 47,000 years, their representative announced, her voice carrying the weight of eons. We have watched species rise and fall, technologies advance and stagnate, and possibilities explored and abandoned. In all that time, we have never encountered a species that consistently chose growth over comfort, exploration over safety, potential over certainty. She paused, and the silence that followed seemed to echo across the entire galaxy. Until now. The Eternal Archive votes to join the human commonwealth, not because we believe humanity is superior to other species, but because humanity has rediscovered something that the galaxy forgot, the courage to become more than what they were. The final tally was announced moments later, 847,293 worlds in favor, 622,847 opposed, with 43,891 abstentions. The margin was closer than humanity had predicted but sufficient to constitute a clear mandate for change. Speaker Mordun's voice was steady as he announced the result. By majority vote, the Galactic Council accepts humanity's offer of admission to the Commonwealth. May the universe forgive us if we have chosen poorly. The response was immediate and dramatic. Across the galaxy, human ships began emerging from faster-than-light jumps, not as conquering fleets but as welcome escorts for the integration process that would begin immediately. The transformation that had taken conquered species months to complete would now be accomplished voluntarily, with the full cooperation of galactic institutions. Admiral Chen's image appeared once more on the Council Chamber's main display, but this time she was surrounded by representatives of every major human world, their faces reflecting satisfaction but not triumph. "Thank you," she said simply. "Welcome to the beginning of everything." What followed was unlike anything in galactic history. The integration process that humanity had developed over centuries of expansion was deployed on a scale that staggered comprehension. Entire civilizations began restructuring themselves according to principles that maximized individual potential while maintaining collective stability. Technological exchanges occurred at a pace that made previous scientific advancements seem glacial. Most remarkably, species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves working together on projects that served the interests of the galaxy as a whole. Within the first standard month, the changes were visible even to casual observation. Trade routes that had been stagnant for centuries suddenly bustled with activity as new technologies and new ideas flowed freely between worlds. Scientific research stations that had been understaffed and underutilized found themselves overwhelmed with volunteers from dozens of species, all eager to contribute to projects that pushed the boundaries of knowledge. But the most profound changes were less visible. Across the galaxy, individuals who had spent their lives accepting the limitations of their assigned roles began exploring possibilities they had never imagined. Artists created works that redefined entire aesthetic traditions. Scientists asked questions that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. Citizens participated in governance through quantum-linked democratic processes that made traditional representative systems seem primitive. The transformation was not without its challenges. Some worlds experienced social disruption as established power structures adapted to new realities. A few civilizations requested temporary autonomy zones where they could adjust to the changes at their own pace. But resistance was minimal, largely because the benefits of Commonwealth membership became apparent almost immediately. 6 months after the vote, Ambassador HFY found herself standing on the observation deck of the New Horizons, humanity's newest exploration vessel, watching as it approached the edge of the galaxy. She was now serving as the Galactic Commonwealth's first Minister of Interspecies Cooperation, a position that had been created specifically for her by unanimous vote of the Expanded Council. Admiral Chen joined her at the observation port, looking out at the void beyond the galactic rim where unknown possibilities waited to be discovered.
"Any regrets?" the Admiral asked. "About the vote?" "None." "About what comes next?" "That remains to be seen." Admiral Chen smiled. "Fear of the unknown is healthy, as long as it doesn't prevent you from exploring the unknown anyway."
Through the observation port, they could see the first wave of exploration vessels preparing to venture beyond the galaxy's edge. Ships from dozens of species, their crews working together toward goals that would have been inconceivable just months earlier. They carried with them not just advanced technology and scientific instruments, but the combined knowledge and wisdom of every civilization in the galaxy.
"What do you think we'll find out there?" Zexai asked.
"Something that will challenge every assumption we've made about what's possible," Admiral Chen replied. "Something that will force us to grow in ways we haven't imagined yet."
"And if we encounter something hostile? Something that views our expansion as a threat?" Admiral Chen's expression grew thoughtful.
"Then, we'll discover whether the principles that brought the galaxy together are strong enough to face challenges that none of us could handle alone."
The first exploration vessel, aptly named Infinite Possibility, engaged its faster-than-light drives and disappeared into the void beyond the galactic rim. It was followed by others, each one carrying representatives from the entire galaxy toward destinations that existed only in the realm of potential. Behind them, the Milky Way continued its ancient rotation, but it was no longer the same galaxy it had been. Every world within it now participated in a project of unprecedented scope and ambition, the deliberate evolution of an entire galactic civilization towards something that had never existed before. The humans had indeed brought the galaxy to its knees, but not through conquest or domination. They had done it by offering a vision of possibilities so compelling that resistance became impossible. They had shown the galaxy what it could become if it stopped accepting limitations and started embracing potential. And now, together, they would discover what lay beyond the boundaries of everything they thought they knew. The universe, vast and filled with wonders beyond imagination, awaited their exploration. The great collaboration had begun, and its ultimate destination remained beautifully, terrifyingly unknown. In the end, humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had liberated it from the prison of its own limitations, and, in doing so, they had gained not subjects but partners in the infinite adventure of existence itself. The galaxy had knelt before human ambition, but it had risen as something greater than either humans or aliens could have achieved alone. It had become the first step toward universal civilization, toward possibilities that existed beyond the edge of imagination itself. The journey to the stars had become a journey toward the infinite, and every species in the galaxy was now part of that eternal exploration. Together, they would discover what it truly meant to reach for the impossible and make it real.